It's been 14 years. Elena has never forgotten that night. The moonlight at the foot of the mountain was as cold as a knife's edge. She curled up in an abandoned log cabin, listening to the howls of a distant wolf pack drawing closer with each pass. She clamped her hand over her mouth, digging her fingernails into the flesh of her palm. The pain kept her awake. She couldn't make a sound, couldn't be smelled, couldn't let anything discover who she was. She was only 7 back then, as thin as a twig snapped by the wind, her skin still bearing the bruises left by her previous foster family. But she knew one thing better than any adult. She couldn't let anyone know she wasn't human. She had kept this secret for 14 years. From the orphanage to the special education school, from her first period to her first college entrance exam, she lived her life like a specimen, carefully keeping her distance from everyone, never attending the bonfire parties after PE class, never going camping with her classmates. Every month, 3 days before the full moon, she would take a leave of absence, claiming she suffered from chronic migraines. Her roommates thought she was reclusive. Her teachers thought she had emotional baggage. Even the administrator of the charitable foundation that had been supporting her lamented, "This child is wonderful in every way, but she's just too closed off." They didn't know that being closed off wasn't a personality trait. It was her lifeline, because in this world, werewolves are hunted. It's not the kind of war between werewolves and humans you see in movies, nor is it a heroic resistance. In reality, werewolves are systematically eradicated. The government claims the Special Species Management Act is for public safety, but in truth, every operation against werewolves is carried out silently in the dead of night. Those taken away never return. No court, no trial, not even a record of their disappearance. When Elena was 7, she watched helplessly as her mother was taken away. Hiding in a closet, she saw through the cracks in the wooden panels as her mother was dragged out, and glanced back at her one last time. That look, she would never forget for the rest of her life. Her mother was silently mouthing the words to her, "Don't come out, stay alive." So for 14 years, Elena lived her life as a human. She learned how to mask the scent of pine and earth on her body with perfume. She learned how to keep her pupils from turning gold when she was emotionally stirred. She learned how to hold back a low growl during menstrual cramps. She learned how to lie in her dorm bed late at night, listening to the howls of the wolf pack outside, digging her nails into her palms and pretending she couldn't hear them. She even got into the law school at Westridge University. She told herself she would become the best lawyer, climb high enough in the ranks, so she could protect herself, have a chance to find her mother, and discover where those captured werewolves had gone. She thought her disguise was flawless, until that evening. That evening, she went to a convenience store on the outskirts of town to buy some groceries. On her way back, she turned into a grove of fallen leaves to take a shortcut. The autumn forest was breathtakingly beautiful, the ground carpeted in gold and red, with light filtering through the branches and leaves, making the whole world seem as if it were steeped in amber. Elena let her guard down for a rare moment. She didn't even notice that the wind had shifted. She bent down to pick up a particularly beautiful maple leaf. Just as her fingertips touched the stem, a voice suddenly came from behind her. The voice was deep and low, as if ground out from the depths of the chest, carrying an aura that made the entire forest fall silent. "Stop." Elena froze instantly. Her heart skipped a beat, then began pounding against her chest like a drum. She didn't turn around, but her skin reacted before her brain could process it. The fine hairs on her neck stood on end, and the most sensitive area at the back of her neck felt as if an electric current had brushed against it. When that scent drifted from the wind into her nostrils, her mind went blank. Pine, cedar, and a wild, suffocatingly intense scent that only her kind could recognize. An alpha, and not just any alpha, the kind who stands at the very top of the pack, the kind with ancient blood flowing through their veins, the kind of legend who can make lesser werewolves kneel involuntarily with a single glance. Elena had mentally prepared herself for the day she would encounter her own kind. She had even rehearsed countless times how to handle it. But an alpha was different. An alpha's sense of smell is 10 times that of an ordinary werewolf. They can detect what ordinary people cannot, and pick up on details that escape the average person. As for the perfume Elena had been wearing, after walking through this forest for 20 minutes, it had long since been blown away by the wind. Her heart sank to the pit of her stomach. "Turn around," the voice said again, its tone colder than before, like a command, like a judgment. Elena took a deep breath, forcing her fear down into her stomach, and turned around. The man stood 3 meters away, silhouetted against the light. The first thing she saw were his eyes, not the brown or black of a normal human, but a shade of amber so deep it bordered on gray. His pupils narrowed into slits, a sign that he was suppressing the beast within. He wore a long, dark gray overcoat. His figure was so slender it felt oppressive, his shoulders unnaturally broad. Standing there, he resembled a drawn dagger. His features were deeply chiseled, his lines sharp. His thin lips were pressed together slightly, his jaw taut. The aura he exuded was like the sky before a storm, oppressive, dangerous, and on the verge of exploding. When his gaze fell upon her, Elena felt a physical reaction, unlike any she had ever experienced. The sensation was hard to describe, as if an invisible knife were slicing its way up from her tailbone. Every inch of her skin screaming to be exposed, every nerve frantically sounding the alarm. "He has recognized you. He knows everything." The man stared at her for about 5 seconds. Those 5 seconds felt like 5 centuries. Then he spoke slowly, a barely perceptible tremor in his voice. "You smell like a wolf." Elena's mind raced in that split second. She could play dumb, say she didn't understand what he was talking about, pretend she was just a lost college student. She could scream, she could be afraid, she could act like a normal human woman being approached by a stranger. She'd practiced all of this, she'd practiced it for 14 years. Her lips parted slightly, ready to utter the response she'd rehearsed countless times. But the man suddenly took a step forward. It was that single step that caused all her facades to crumble instantly. The oppressive pressure of an alpha drawing near was beyond human comprehension. That scent, those ripples of power, that resonance emanating from the genetic level, felt like a key tearing down the walls she'd painstakingly built over 14 years. Her pupils contracted uncontrollably, then dilated sharply, a fleeting flash of gold gleaming deep within her eyes. She saw it. A similar flash of gold had flickered deep within his pupils as well. The air froze. The fallen leaves at her feet came to a standstill. The wind ceased. Even the sound of cars on the distant highway seemed to be swallowed up by something. The two of them stared at each other in the golden twilight, neither speaking, but Elena knew it was too late. Her 14 years of pretense, her 14 years of living cautiously in the human world, her 14 years of believing she would never be discovered. In that moment, it was all over. The Alpha King had sensed her, and an alpha never lets go of anything that belongs to him. Alexander Blackwood. In the high society of West Ridge, this name is like a knife hidden beneath velvet. Few know it, but everyone lowers their voice by a notch when mentioning him. He is the current heir to the Blackwood family, controlling a business empire that spans 3 states. His holdings range from real estate to biotechnology, from private security to high-end logistics, permeating nearly every vein of this city. The media calls him the Invisible King, because he never grants interviews, never attends charity galas, and never leaves behind a single photograph that could be publicly discussed. But none of that is the real him. The real him is the Alpha King of the Northern Wolf Pack, the supreme ruler of all werewolf clans within a 2,000-kilometer radius. His lineage traces back to the 12th century ancestors, who first established the Order of the Wolf Clan on the icy plains of northern Europe. On the day of his awakening as an adult, his power far exceeded the expectations of all the clan elders. Now 29 years old, he has ruled the pack for 11 years, never defeated, never challenged, and never has a single werewolf dared to meet his gaze for more than 3 seconds. But at this moment, in this secluded, deciduous forest on the outskirts of the city, this ruler was trembling. Elena saw his hand clenched into a fist inside his trench coat pocket, his knuckles turning white. She saw his Adam's apple bob once, a movement that only an alpha makes when desperately suppressing his instincts. She could even hear the pounding of his heart in his chest, a rhythm too rapid for a ruler, more like the heartbeat of a hunter who had finally tracked down a prey long lost. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was lower than before, so low it sounded like a growl forced from the depths of his throat. Elena didn't answer. It wasn't that she didn't want to. It was as if her throat had been locked shut. The alpha's presence wasn't merely psychological. It was physical, a real physiological reaction that made her feel her blood slow, her breath grow shallow, and her muscles begin to tense involuntarily. Her mind was screaming at her to run, but her body felt as if it were nailed to the spot, unable to move. Alexander took another step forward, then two. Now there was only an arm's length between them. He towered over her by a full head, and when he looked down at her, his amber eyes churned with emotions. She couldn't decipher anger, shock, desire, and something deeper and darker, like a wildfire that had been smothered for too long, and had finally found an outlet. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said, his tone suddenly softening, as if he realized his presence had frightened her and was forcing himself to suppress his instincts. "I'm not here to hurt you." Elena finally found her voice. She took a step back, her voice dry as sandpaper. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a student passing by. If you come any closer, I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Alexander cut her off, the corner of his mouth curving ever so slightly. But it wasn't a smile, it was a curve of utter bitterness. "Go ahead and call the police. Tell them a strange man stopped you in the woods. The police arrive, and then what? They'll smell your scent, notice your pupils change color under certain lights, realize your heart rate is slower than normal, and find your body temperature is higher than average. Do you think they'll help you or take you away?" Elena's blood ran cold in that instant. Every word he spoke felt like a nail, driving one by one into the wall she'd spent 14 years building. He knew everything. Not only did he know she was a werewolf, but he also knew how the human world viewed werewolves, knew the truth behind those late-night disappearances, and knew exactly what she was afraid of. "Who are you?" She heard her own voice trembling, but this time it wasn't fear. It was anger, the kind of anger that comes when someone cuts through all your facades with a single stroke. "What exactly do you want?" Alexander was silent for a long time. The forest was so quiet she could hear the sound of leaves falling to the ground, the flapping of a crow's wings in the distance. Then he did something Elena never expected. He dropped to one knee. It wasn't a bow, nor a sign of weakness, but in the traditions of the wolf pack, the alpha king kneeling on one knee signified the highest level of respect and submission. He kept his head bowed, his golden hair glowing dimly in the twilight, his voice hoarse as if he'd just crawled out of the desert. "My name is Alexander Blackwood. I am the alpha of the Northern Wolf Pack. I've been searching for you for 14 years. He raised his head, and the suppression in those amber eyes finally vanished. Golden light burst forth unreservedly, like two burning flames. "You are Elena, aren't you? Your birth name is Luna. You are the last of the Moon, Shadow Wolf clan. Your mother was the woman my clan could not save, no matter how hard we tried." Elena's world shattered in that instant. She heard her own heartbeat, the roar of blood pounding in her eardrums, and the creak of the closet doors as her mother was dragged away 14 years ago. The Moonshadow Wolf clan, a name she had never heard before, the last of her bloodline, an identity she had never been told about. She knew her mother was a werewolf, knew she had inherited her mother's bloodline, but she had never known her clan had a name, never known that behind her mother's disappearance, there were people searching for her, never known that there were people in this world who cared whether she was alive or not. "You're lying." Her voice trembled, and her eyes began to burn. My mother was just an ordinary. Your mother was the sacred maiden of the Moonshadow Wolf clan." Alexander stood up, his expression betraying a pain she couldn't fathom, as if, the moment those words left his mouth, his own wounds were being torn open anew. 14 years ago, the human government joined forces with rebel factions within the Wolf clan to carry out a purge against your clan. Of the 37 members of the Moonshadow Wolf clan, 36 were taken away that night. You were the only one who survived. He paused, his voice hoarse and barely audible, because your mother used her last remaining magic to cast a seal upon you. It sealed away your wolf nature. It made you smell like an ordinary human child. Tears slid down Elena's cheeks without warning. She hadn't even realized she was crying. For 14 years, she had believed her mother was just an ordinary werewolf who had been unlucky enough to be captured. She had always thought she was alone in this world, that no one knew of her existence, that no one remembered her, and that no one had ever looked for her. But that wasn't the case. It turned out that on that night when she was 7, her mother had already protected her with her own life. "Why are you telling me this?" she heard herself ask, her voice as fragile as leaves in the wind. "What good does it do to tell me this? It's been 14 years. I've been living just fine. I don't need to know this. I don't need." "Because your seal is weakening," Alexander interrupted her. His gaze suddenly turned so serious it sent a chill down her spine. "Have you started having those kinds of dreams lately? Dreams of running under the moonlight, of fangs growing in your mouth, of chasing something? Have you started craving raw meat? Has your menstrual cycle become irregular? And do you feel inexplicably agitated every time it comes?" Elena opened her mouth, only to find she couldn't say a word. He was right about every single thing. She thought those were just psychological issues, insomnia and nightmares caused by stress and anxiety. And that feeling of suffocation on the balcony under the moonlight late at night was just a common symptom of depression. She'd even seen the school counselor, who diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder and prescribed sleeping pills. It turned out that the seal was failing. "Your seal will hold out for no more than 3 months." Alexander's voice carried the unquestionable resolve of an alpha. "After 3 months, your wolf nature will fully awaken. By then, the 14-year disguise you've worn will vanish completely, and you'll emit the scent unique to the Moonshadow clan. A scent that the human government's latest biometric detection equipment can pick up from 2 kilometers away." He stared into her eyes and said, word by word, "Elena, you have only 3 months left in safety. After 3 months, they'll come for you." His final words felt like a hand clenching around Elena's heart. She suddenly realized one thing: she couldn't escape. For 14 years, she'd believed she was living safely, convinced that as long as she was careful enough, she'd never be discovered. But the seal would vanish, her wolf nature would awaken, and the forces that had hunted her mother would still be waiting for her 14 years later. "And what about you?" Elena lifted her head. Her tears had dried, replaced by a calmness she'd never seen in herself before. "You're telling me all this. You've come to find me. What do you want?" A faint curve formed at the corner of Alexander's mouth, but there was no smile in it, only a heavy, almost suffocating seriousness. "The Moonshadow Wolf clan is the only group capable of purifying the curse of the wolf bloodline. Your lineage, if our clan's prophecy is correct, is the only key to breaking the shackles forged 1,000 years ago. I need you to come with me, back to the Northern Wolf Pack's territory, to complete the bloodline awakening ritual before the seal fails completely. He paused, his gaze growing complex. And what? Elena pressed. He didn't answer immediately. The wind whistled through the forest, whipping up a few withered leaves that landed at their feet. Moonlight seeped through a gap in the clouds, falling upon Alexander Blackwood's face. In that moment, he did not look like an alpha king ruling over hundreds of wolf clans, but rather like an ordinary man trapped in some kind of fate. And 14 years ago, on the night the moon, Shadow Wolf clan was wiped out, my father made a promise to your mother that if her bloodline survived, the Blackwood family would protect her with the power of eternity. His voice dropped, as if the very words caused his own throat to ache. My father failed to keep that promise. He carried that guilt until his dying day. Now it is my turn. Elena stood there, the moonlight stretching her shadow thin and long, watching the Alpha King, pride etched into his very bones, bow his head and tell her, "It's my turn." She suddenly realized that the life she had believed she'd been living for the past 14 years had never truly begun. She had been hiding. She had been running. She had been pretending. But an alpha never lets go of what belongs to him. And she had nowhere left to run. Alexander held out his hand. The hand hovered in midair, its fingers long and slender, the knuckles sharply defined, and a faint scar running across the palm. As if left by the mark of something sharp, he didn't force her, nor did he rush her. He simply held out his hand like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, trying to catch a falling person. Elena stared at that hand for a long time. Her reason told her not to trust him. This stranger, this Alpha King who had suddenly burst into her peaceful life, claimed he had been searching for her for 14 years, that she had only 3 months left to live safely, that her mother was the sacred maiden of the Moonshadow Wolf clan, and that he was here to fulfill his father's promise. It all sounded too much like a carefully woven trap. She had been taught from childhood never to trust anyone, never to be fooled by kindness, because in this world, everyone who approaches you has an agenda. But her hand had already risen before her reason could make a decision. The moment her fingertips touched the palm of his hand, an electric current shot up her spine from the point of contact. The sensation wasn't unfamiliar. She had read in books that there was a special spark between an alpha and his destined mate, but she'd always thought it was just a legend, a fairy tale werewolves used to trick young girls, until this very moment, when her icy fingertips touched Alexander Blackwood's scorching palm. The tremor welling up from the depths of her soul made her knees go weak. Alexander's hand tightened violently the instant it touched hers. His grip was terrifyingly strong. His fingers clamped down on her hand, as if he'd seized a long-lost treasure. The pressure so intense it almost hurt. She looked up at him and saw his pupils had turned completely golden. His vertical slits narrowed to thin lines. His jaw set as hard as iron. "I'm sorry," he said, immediately easing his grip slightly, his voice hoarse. I need to get a grip." Elena said nothing. She could feel him trembling. This Alpha King, this ruler of a 2,000-kilometer wolf territory, was trembling as he held her hand. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. But strangely, the fear was receding. In its place was a sensation she'd never experienced before, as if something deep within her body was responding to his touch, like a key that had lain dormant for 14 years. Finally finding the lock it was meant for. "Come with me," Alexander said, his tone having regained its unquestionable calm. "You don't need to pack. Everything will be ready where I'm taking you. Your student records, your identity, every trace of you in the human world, my team will take care of it." "How do you know where I live?" Elena asked suddenly. She'd wanted to ask this question all along, but had been too stunned by the barrage of information to speak up. "How do you know my name? How do you know which university I attend? How did you happen to show up in this very forest?" Alexander glanced at her And in that glance there was something complex guilt, hesitation, and some deeper meaning she couldn't decipher. He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I've always known where you were." The air froze in that instant. What do you mean?" Elena's voice cracked. "For 14 years, I've had people secretly protecting you." Alexander didn't look at her as he spoke. His gaze rested on the treetops in the distance, swallowed by the twilight. "It was the Blackwood Foundation that arranged for you to be taken from the orphanage to the boarding school. The full scholarship that got you into college was also awarded in the foundation's name. Even the off-campus apartment you're living in now, the landlord is one of my mother's people." Elena felt her blood run cold. She recalled the financial aid that arrived punctually every year, the wishing you well written at the end of every letter by the unseen foundation administrator, and how she'd once considered herself lucky to rent that apartment at a price far below market rate. It turned out none of it was a coincidence. For 14 years, someone had been watching her every step. Someone had been watching over her every choice. She thought she was living alone in this world, that no one remembered her or cared about her. But someone had been watching her all along. "Why didn't you come find me sooner?" Her voice trembled, and her eyes stung again. 14 years, do you know what kind of life I've been living? Do you know what I was thinking when I was bullied at the orphanage? When I cried alone in the dead of night, covering my mouth? When I got my first period and was so scared I thought I was going to die? I was thinking, my mother is dead. There's no one in this world who will protect me. Alexander closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, Elena saw that his eyes were red. "I promised your mother." His voice seemed to be squeezed from the very depths of his chest, hoarse to the point of breaking. "I was there the night she was taken. She was only a child, just 7 years old. Your mother made her kneel before me, take my hand, and make me swear that I would never, under any circumstances, appear before her until she came of age." Elena's pupils contracted sharply. She said that if you knew your true identity, you wouldn't be careful enough. She said that if you knew someone was protecting you, you'd lose that vigilance you need to survive on your own. She said this was the best protection she could give you. Alexander's grip tightened, squeezing her hand until it stung slightly. "For 14 years, I've watched you grow up, watched you transform from that frail little girl into an adult capable of protecting yourself. My mother sends me photos of you every month. There's a whole row of them in the drawer of my study." His voice finally broke as well. "Do you think I didn't want to come find you? Do you think I didn't want to storm in and tear those bullies to pieces when you were being picked on? Do you think I didn't want to be by your side every full moon, telling you you're not alone?" He lowered his head, his forehead almost touching hers. "But I promised your mother. I swore a blood oath, an alpha's blood oath. Breaking it shortens your life." Elena felt as if something had struck her soul with a violent blow. She remembered the night her mother was taken away. She had indeed heard a stranger's voice, a low, young, tearful voice, speaking from outside the closet. "I'll protect her, I swear." She had always thought it was a hallucination, a voice her mind had conjured out of fear to comfort herself. It turned out to be real. Her tears finally broke free. All her defenses, all her reason, all the high walls she'd built around herself over the past 14 years. They all crumbled in that moment. She threw herself into Alexander's arms and wept uncontrollably, like a child who'd finally found a home. Her fingernails dug into his trench coat as she buried her face in his chest, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Alexander froze for a second. This alpha king clearly had no idea how to handle a girl crying her eyes out. But soon he lowered his head, resting his chin on top of hers, wrapped his arms around her shoulders, and held her close in a manner so cautious it bordered on clumsy. His hand patted her back gently, just as she had imagined countless times as a child in the orphanage. The kind of gesture a father should make. "I'll take you home," he said. his voice low and gentle, a stark contrast to the imposing alpha king of moments before. "Elena, I'll take you home." She nodded through her tears. That evening, in the deciduous forest on the outskirts of West Ridge, a girl used 14 years' worth of tears to break down the prison she'd believed she'd never escape. And the Alpha King, who had waited 14 years, could finally fulfill the most important vow of his life. Alexander's car was parked on the side of the road, just outside the woods. It was a black sedan with no logo and no license plate, its windows tinted so dark they were opaque. As Elena slid into the passenger seat, the car was filled with a faint scent of leather and wood exactly like his scent. She leaned back in her seat, watching the woods recede outside the window as the neon lights of Shiling City gradually came to life in the twilight, feeling as if she were in a dream. 14 years of her life were completely transformed by a single twilight. The car drove for about 40 minutes, leaving the city behind, passing through a mountain road shrouded in thick fog, and finally coming to a stop in front of a massive iron gate. There was no house number on the gate, only a wolf's head emblem carved in the center. The wolf's eyes were two dark red gemstones that glowed with a faint, eerie light under the headlights. The iron gate opened silently, as if someone had recognized the car on the surveillance feed. The trees lining the driveway grew denser and denser, their branches and leaves intertwining to almost completely block out the sky. Elena could sense something shifting in the air. The air pressure was dropping, the temperature rising, and the air was filled with a scent only she could detect. The scent of many wolves, rich, complex, and intertwined. Her instincts began to sound the alarm. Every cell in her body was telling her, "You have entered the territory of a wolf pack. Relax." Alexander's voice came from the driver's seat, his tone much softer than before. "This is the main territory of the Northland Pack. Everything within a 50-kilometer radius is our domain. Everyone here is a werewolf. You don't need to hide, you don't need to be afraid, and you don't need to control your scent." Tita, you don't need to control your scent. Those words were like a key, unlocking a lock within Elena that she had never touched before. She didn't know when she had grown so accustomed to it that she no longer even realized she was controlling her scent. That tense feeling of holding her inner wildness down, as if a string were perpetually stretched tight. She tried to relax, just a little, letting her breath deepen slightly. Then she smelled it. Earth, pine resin, moonlight, and something more primal, a scent rising from the depths of the earth. A fine layer of goosebumps broke out on her skin, not from the cold, but from comfort. A comfort she had never experienced before, one that made every cell in her body cheer. It was as if she had been holding her breath underwater for 14 years and had finally surfaced to take her first breath of air. "How does it feel?" Alexander asked. Elena opened her mouth and realized her voice had changed. It wasn't that the human language had changed. It was that a deeper resonance had settled in her vocal cords, as if her voice no longer belonged solely to the human vocal apparatus. "It's strange. It feels like something has awakened." Alexander's fingers tightened around the steering wheel for a moment, but he said nothing more. The car finally came to a stop in front of a massive stone building. The structure looked as if it had been transported straight from a medieval European castle. Dark green vines crawled up the gray stone walls. Soaring spires pierced the night sky, and warm light shone from every window. A row of people stood on the steps, about 7 or 8 of them, men and women of varying ages. As Elena got out of the car, all eyes turned to her at once. It felt like a spotlight shining on her face. She could feel those gazes sweeping over her. It wasn't the curiosity or scrutiny of a human social gathering. It was the scrutiny of wolves. They were seeing her with their sense of smell, discerning her scent, and judging her rank and identity. Her instincts told her that these people were all higher in rank than she was. Their auras felt like layer upon layer of walls pressing down on her. "Step back." Alexander's voice wasn't loud, but it carried an air of absolute authority. The row of people took half a step back in unison. It was so obedient it startled Elena. She saw no trace of violence or threat in this man. Just one word, and they stepped back. That was the power of an alpha. "This is Martha, my mother." Alexander walked over to her side and pointed to a middle-aged woman standing at the front. The woman looked to be in her 40s, well-preserved, with silver gray hair pulled back into a low bun, wearing a dark blue long dress. Her features bore a striking resemblance to Alexander's, especially her eyes. The same amber hue, the same deep piercing intensity. Yet her gaze held an extra warmth compared to Alexander's. When it rested on Elena, it carried a tenderness that was almost enough to bring tears to her eyes. "My child," Martha said, her voice unexpectedly gentle, as if a pair of warm hands were cupping Elena's face. "Welcome home." Elena's eyes stung again. She had cried more today than in all the past 14 years combined. But she couldn't help it. She had never had a mother. No one had ever spoken to her using the words, "Come home." To her, the phrase was foreign, distant, a concept that existed only in other people's mouths. Martha stepped forward, and without asking permission, gently embraced her. The embrace was light and brief, but Elena caught the scent of her own kind on her, the scent of a wolf pack mother. It carried notes of pine, old books, and the aroma of simmering soup from the kitchen. In that instant, Elena's body relaxed of its own accord. She didn't even realize she was relaxing. She just instinctively knew this woman was safe. Alexander stood nearby watching the embrace, his expression complex. It was as if someone who had waited far too long had finally seen the two most important scenes of his life merge into a single frame. "Come in," Martha said, with a smile as she released Elena and wiped the tears from the corners of her now reddened eyes. "Your room is ready. Are you hungry? The cook made venison soup today." Venison soup. Elena's stomach let out a loud growl at that moment. She hadn't had a proper meal in days. Ever since the nightmares began, she'd lost her appetite for everything. But now, the scent of meat wafting from the building made her feel a hunger she'd never known before. It wasn't the hunger of an empty stomach. It was her body's craving for meat. As she followed Martha into the hall, her steps were a little quicker than she realized. Alexander walked behind her, his gaze fixed on her back. The atmosphere at the dinner table was much more relaxed than Elena had imagined. Martha spent almost the entire time serving her food, with a motherly enthusiasm she'd only ever seen in television shows, alternately saying, "You're too thin, and this soup is the best for building blood." There were a few other people at the table. Alexander's second in command, Daniel, a burly man in his early 30s with a knife scar, and the beta leader, Marcus, a bespectacled, refined middle-aged man, who spoke softly though Elena could sense his formidable presence. Everyone was careful, not to ask her too many questions, as if worried they might scare her away. But the questions would have to be asked sooner or later. After dinner, Martha took her to her room. It was a large room on the 3rd floor of the castle, with a window overlooking the forest and the moon. The bedding was new, and the duvet smelled of lavender. On the nightstand sat a small lamp and a picture frame. Elena stepped closer to take a look and froze. Inside the frame was a photo of her at 15, wearing her high school uniform, standing under the cherry blossom tree at the school entrance, smiling like a fool. "Alexander took it," Martha said, standing in the doorway, a hint of tenderness in her voice. "He comes to see you once a year. He doesn't get close, just from a distance. He just takes one photo." Elena's fingers gently traced the glass edge of the frame, a vague, indescribable emotion churning inside her. She recalled the bouquet of white wildflowers that always appeared in her mailbox around her birthday. No card, no signature. She'd always assumed it was from a classmate with a secret crush on her. It turned out to be him. "He didn't want me to tell you," Martha sighed softly. "But I'm a mother. I can tell that for the past 14 years, there's been someone living in my son's heart. Elena didn't answer. She simply gazed at the moon outside the window. At that golden full moon. This was probably the first time in 14 years she didn't need to fear the full moon, because in this place, the full moon belonged to her. But as the moonlight fell on her face, a question suddenly welled up in her heart. She turned to look at Martha. My mother, what kind of person was she really? Martha's gaze drifted far away in that instant. She was silent for a long time, so long that Elena thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice sounding as if it were rising from the very depths of the water. She was the bravest woman I've ever known, not just because she sacrificed herself to protect you, but because she knew she would die, yet she never once harbored resentment. On the night she was taken, she said one thing to Alexander. She said the bloodline of the Moonshadow clan would never be extinguished, no matter what, because my daughter is the breaker. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The game breaker. What does that mean? Martha looked at her, her gaze carrying a weighty, almost indecipherable depth. We wolves have an ancient prophecy. It concerns the last bloodline of the Moonshadow clan. On the day you awaken, your blood will break a curse that has lasted 1,000 years. That curse has prevented all werewolves from ever being truly free. We've been drained by infighting, suppressed by our bloodlines, enslaved by hatred. And you are the only one who can put an end to all of this. Elena's hands were trembling. It wasn't fear. It was a weight she had never felt before pressing down on her shoulders. She had always thought of herself as just a lucky orphan, a fugitive hiding in the human world. But it turned out that from the very beginning, her birth had carried the burden of an entire clan. The one who breaks the stalemate. This identity came too suddenly, too heavily, crushing her until she could barely breathe. But when the moonlight fell upon her hand, she saw a faint golden glow shimmering at her fingertips within the silver light. It was as if something within her blood had finally begun to awaken. Alexander knocked on her door early the next morning. When Elena woke up, it took her a moment to realize where she was. An unfamiliar ceiling, unfamiliar smells, unfamiliar angles of light. Then everything from last night flooded back into her mind. The Alpha King in the woods, 14 years of guardianship, the Moonshadow clan, the breaker. She sat up and found her senses even sharper than they had been the day before. She could hear the servants whispering at the end of the hallway, the sound of a squirrel rummaging for nuts in a tree hollow 200 meters away outside the window, and the scent of cedar and musk wafting from Alexander's body on the other side of the door. So intense it felt as though his entire being was radiating pheromones. I'm coming in. Alexander's voice came from outside the door, not a question, but a statement. Then the door swung open. He had changed his clothes and was wearing a dark gray shirt. The cuffs rolled up to his forearms, revealing a section of his muscular forearm and a dark tattoo on his wrist. A totem of wolf heads encircling a central design. She recognized it instantly as the mark of the Northern Wolf Clan's Alpha. He held a tray in his hands, bearing a bowl of steaming porridge and a glass of milk. The scene stood in stark contrast to his Alpha King aura, as if the fiercest wolf in the forest had walked up to her carrying a flower in its mouth. Martha said, "You didn't sleep well last night." He set the tray on the nightstand, his gaze unconsciously sweeping over her face. Nightmares. Elena didn't answer. She had indeed had a nightmare. In the dream she stood beneath the blood-red moonlight, surrounded by countless corpses at her feet. Her hands were covered in blood. She didn't know whose it was, but her heart ached so intensely in the dream that it felt as if something had torn it in two. "You're not used to this place," Alexander said, sitting down in the chair beside the bed, his hands folded on his knees. "That's normal. You grew up in the human world. The wolf within you has never been nurtured. It's like someone who's been locked away for 14 years. When suddenly released, their first reaction to the sunlight isn't warmth, but a stinging pain. Then, how am I supposed to get used to it?" Elena asked, her voice slightly hoarse. Alexander looked at her, a complex flicker in his amber eyes. Your awakening requires 3 steps. The first is physical. You need to gradually adapt to eating raw meat and running under the moonlight, allowing your body to remember how to be a wolf. The second is bloodline related. You need to undergo a ritual to awaken your bloodline memories, glimpse the fragments left by your ancestors, and understand the true history of the Moonshadow Wolf clan. The third step is, he paused. What is the third step? Elena pressed. Alexander's gaze dropped for a second, then lifted to meet hers directly. The third step is choosing a mate, marking you. The bloodline awakening of the Moon Shadow Clan requires an alpha's pheromones as a catalyst. If an alpha does not mark you during the awakening process, your body will not be able to withstand the force of the transformation. When it is complete, the air suddenly grew thin. Elena's face flushed instantly. She didn't fully grasp the meaning of all those werewolf terms, but she understood the word mark. In all werewolf cultures, a mark signified a lifelong bond, a soul contract, and one person becoming the other's partner completely. She had met this man only yesterday, and today he was telling her that she had to be marked to survive. Thursday that must be. She began, her voice so soft it was barely audible. It must be an alpha powerful enough. Alexander's voice was low and steady, but Elena noticed his clenched fingers tighten slightly. And in the entire northern pack, the only one with enough power to perform the marking. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Elena understood. Her heart was pounding so loudly, it sounded like a drum, filling the entire room with its beat. She lowered her head, staring at the faint wolf, head pattern embroidered on the quilt, feeling her cheeks burn hot enough to fry an egg. Reason told her this was absurd, too fast. She hadn't even figured out the rules of this world yet. But something deep within her, something awakening, was screaming in response to his words. That thing recognized him. That thing grew quiet when he drew near and grew restless when he left. I don't need an answer right away. Alexander stood up, his movements sharp, as if he feared that lingering for even a second might lead him to cross a line. Eat first, then I'll take you to see something. He paused at the doorway without looking back. Elena, whatever you ultimately choose, I won't force you. I've sworn a blood oath. The door closed. Elena picked up the bowl of porridge and realized her hands were shaking. The porridge was warm and thick, mixed with bits of meat and the scent of some herb. It left her stomach feeling warm and comforting. She finished it spoonful by spoonful, then drank the milk in her cup as well. She needed strength, whatever it was for. The thing Alexander took her to see was in a secret chamber deep beneath the castle. The entrance to the chamber was hidden behind a bookshelf in the library, requiring both Alexander's palm print and iris scan to open. A heavy iron door closed behind them, followed by a flight of stone steps leading downward, with glowing minerals embedded in the walls on either side, as if fireflies had been sealed within the stone. The air grew cooler, and the scent grew older, as if they had stepped into the depths of time. The chamber was vast, yet almost empty. Only a single stone stood in the center, a massive translucent black crystal, nearly as tall as a person, its surface as smooth as a mirror. Something flowed within the crystal, a dark golden hue, like liquid light. As Elena approached the crystal, her heart suddenly gave a violent thud, as if something were resonating within her. This is the Moonshadow crystal, Alexander said, standing behind her, his voice echoing low within the enclosed space. Every Moonshadow Wolf clan high priestess leaves a drop of her blood on this crystal upon ascending to the throne. The collective memory of your clan is sealed within it. As soon as your blood touches it, you will see. He handed her a small silver dagger. Elena's hand was steady as she took the dagger. She thought she'd be afraid, but she wasn't. Her body knew the answer before her mind did. She needed to know the truth. She needed to know what her mother had gone through, why the Moonshadow Wolf clan had been wiped out, and what that prophecy truly meant. She gently pricked her index finger with the tip of the dagger. A drop of blood seeped out, a deep crimson tinged with a barely perceptible golden sheen. She pressed her finger against the surface of the black crystal. The moment she touched it, the entire world vanished. Elena found herself standing on a vast plain, beneath a full moon so large it seemed unreal. The moonlight was silvery, white, as bright as daylight. Bonfires blazed across the plain, and hundreds of werewolves danced around the flames. Their movements were wild and free, their howls reverberating through the air, filled with the power of life. Standing at the very center of the crowd was a woman whose face Elena recognized instantly, even with only 7 years of memories. Mother. Mother wore a white robe, her long hair flowing freely, and a crown woven from thorns upon her head. Her eyes were not human, they were pure silver, their pupils like 2 glowing moons. She stood before the bonfire, extending her hand. A ball of silver light coalesced at her fingertips, rose into the sky, exploded, and transformed into countless shooting stars that plunged into the bodies of every werewolf around her. The werewolves let out sighs of relief. Some knelt down to pay their respects to the mother. This was the holy maiden of the Moonshadow Wolf clan. Not a ruler, not a warrior, a bestower of blessings, a healer, the only being among the wolves capable of purifying curses and mending the rifts in the bloodline. The image suddenly shattered, as if a mirror had been smashed by a hammer. A new scene surged into view. The same plain, the same campfire, but this time the flames had turned blood red. Corpses lay on the ground, werewolf corpses. Some still retained their half-wolf forms, while others had already reverted to human shape. The mother knelt in a pool of blood, a young girl resting on her knees. The girl was crying, but the mother was smiling at her. The mother was speaking. Elena couldn't hear the words, but she read her lips. Stay alive. You are the one who will break the cycle. You will shatter all of this. The vision shattered once more, and Elena's consciousness was yanked violently back to reality. She collapsed to her knees on the cold floor, gasping for breath, her back soaked in cold sweat. Tears streamed down her face. She didn't even know when she'd started crying. Alexander crouched beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder, his brow furrowed, his eyes filled with concern. What did you see? His voice was soft. Elena turned to look at him, a faint silver glow from the moonlight crystal lingering deep within her pupils. I saw her. I saw how she died. She stopped abruptly, because in that final second of the memory, she had seen something else. A figure standing on a distant ridge, watching the slaughter unfold. The figure was tall and familiar. A circle of golden wolf had totems encircled his shoulders, exactly like the tattoo on Alexander's wrist. Alexander. Her voice suddenly became extremely calm, so calm that even she was frightened by it. 14 years ago, on the night the Moonshadow Wolf clan was wiped out, where were you? Alexander froze. In that instant, his hand was still resting on her shoulder, but its warmth had suddenly turned cold. His pupils contracted slightly. A golden glow surged briefly from the depths of his eyes. Then he forced it back down. He remained silent for about 5 seconds, during which the air in the chamber seemed to be sucked away, leaving a silence, so profound one could hear the hum of energy flowing through the ore in the walls. What did you see? He asked, his voice low. He didn't ask her why she'd asked that, didn't play dumb, didn't change the subject. He simply asked, what did you see? Elena stood up from the floor. Her legs were still a little weak, but she held her back straight. She stared at Alexander's face, at those eyes she had believed yesterday were full of sincerity and tenderness, and said, word by word, I saw a figure standing on the ridge. On his shoulder was a golden wolf head totem exactly like the one on your wrist. That man watched the entire process of my mother's murder. He didn't move. He didn't save her. As the last few words left her mouth, her voice trembled. But it was a tremor of anger, not of sorrow. "Alexander, tell me, was that you?" Alexander closed his eyes. That gesture alone was an answer. If he were to say no, he would have opened his eyes immediately to refute her, angry, shocked, and defensive. But closing his eyes, that was an instinctive reaction of someone preparing to take a heavy blow. In that instant, Elena's heart sank deeper than the ground itself. "It was me." Alexander opened his eyes. His pupils had turned completely golden. There was no evasion in those eyes, no excuses, only a self-destructive honesty. "The person standing on that ridge, it was me." Elena took a step back. Her back collided with the Moonshadow crystal. Its icy touch pierced through her clothes and into her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. It was as if countless voices were screaming simultaneously inside her head. The screams were so loud she could barely hear her own words. "You told me. You told me you'd been searching for me for 14 years. You told me you'd been protecting me all along. You told me you swore a blood oath to my mother. But you stood by and watched as she was killed." I was 15 at the time. Alexander's voice sounded as if it were being ground out from the depths of his throat, every word laced with blood. "My father took me there. He said he wanted me to see clearly what happens when you go against humans." "What do you mean?" Elena's voice cracked. Alexander took a step forward, but Elena immediately stepped back, as if his proximity would burn her. He stopped, standing 2 paces away, his hands hanging at his sides, clenched into fists. The night the Moonshadow clan was wiped out wasn't a unilateral action by the human government. His words exploded like a bomb in the air of the secret chamber. It was a joint operation. The human government provided weapons and intelligence, while the rebel faction within the Wolf clan supplied locations and breach strategies. And the Blackwood family, my father, he chose neutrality. Neutrality? Elena's laughter was sharp and broken, echoing through the chamber. Is neutrality watching 37 innocent werewolves get slaughtered? Is neutrality watching the scientists get taken away? Is the neutrality you speak of standing on a ridge and watching the show? It wasn't watching a show. Alexander's voice suddenly rose. It was the first time Elena had ever heard him lose control. His voice carried a pain that had been suppressed for 14 years, as if certain words had been stuck in his throat for a full 14 years. "My father made me stand there so I would remember the taste of betrayal, remember the price of cowardice, remember that if an alpha isn't strong enough, he can only watch the people he cares about die, powerless to do anything." His eyes reddened, but he didn't cry. He stood beside the Moonshadow crystal, its dim glow casting a deep shadow across his profile, making him look like a stone statue on the verge of collapse. I knelt down and begged him. Alexander's voice suddenly grew so soft, it was as if he were speaking only to himself. I knelt on the ground, clutching his cloak, begging him to send troops, begging him to save her, begging him to at least save that little girl. "And you?" He said no. He said the Moonshadow Wolf clan's downfall was part of the prophecy, and intervening would alter the predetermined course of fate. He said your mother agreed to this arrangement. Elena's body shook violently. "You said, what?" "Your mother knew what was going to happen." Alexander looked up at her, his gaze filled with the cruelest kind of honesty. "I'm not making excuses. I'm just telling you the truth. Your mother knew all of this before it happened. The Moonshadow Wolf clan's chosen one could see the future. She chose this path. She traded her own life for yours, so that you might live and one day awaken as the game breaker." "It can't be." Elena's tears fell silently. If she knew, why did she have to die? Why did she leave me alone? Why did she let me spend 14 years all alone? Because the way she loved you wasn't by watching you grow up. Alexander took a step forward. This time Elena didn't flinch. He stood before her, less than an arm's length away. His hand rose, hovering in midair, never touching her. The way she loved you was by maximizing your chances of survival. She calculated every possible outcome. If you'd fled with her, both of you would have been caught. If she'd surrendered so you could hide, you would have survived. If she fought back, you'd be caught in the crossfire. She chose the only path that would let you see tomorrow's sun. Elena leaned against the cold crystal, her body sliding down bit by bit. She finally sat on the ground, hugging her knees, her face buried between them, her shoulders shaking violently. She cried with all her might, as if trying to weep out every ounce of the grievances, fear, loneliness, and resentment she'd carried for these past 14 years. Alexander crouched down in front of her. He didn't touch her, didn't say stop crying, didn't say everything will be all right. He simply crouched there like a silent guardian statue, using his very presence to tell her, I haven't left, and I will never leave again in this lifetime. Elena cried for a long time, so long that she thought she had cried herself dry. Then she looked up, her eyes red and swollen, her voice hoarse, but she asked a question Alexander hadn't anticipated at all. What exactly is my role in that prophecy? Alexander paused. What did you say? You said it twice. My mother's choice is connected to the prophecy's plan. The Moonshadow Wolf clan's destruction is part of the prophecy. The breaker is meant to break the curse. Elena looked into his eyes swollen to mere slits, and in them shone a light brighter than at any moment before. What else? Haven't you told me? Alexander fell silent. This silence lasted longer than any before. He lowered his head and looked at his hands adorned with the black ring, engraved with the same dark patterns as the crystal. The last daughter of the Moon, Shadow Wolf Clan. You will be sacrificed to the moonlight in exchange for the end of the Wolf Clan's bloodline curse. His voice seemed to drift from far, far away. That is the first part of the prophecy. But its second part was reinterpreted 23 years ago. After giving birth to you, your mother discovered that hidden second half of the prophecy. He lifted his head, his gaze fixed directly into hers. The sacrifice is not death. The sacrifice is a right to achieve soul resonance with your destined alpha. When your two souls fuse completely during the rite, the power of the Moonshadow Wolf clan will be fully activated, and the curse will vanish from this world. And that alpha, Elena's breath caught. That alpha, who is it? Alexander didn't answer. He didn't need to. The golden wolf-Xian head totem on his wrist glowed faintly in the crystal's Yogwan. And in that very moment, Elena's heart felt as though it had been gently grasped by something. A pain, but not a tearing pain, rather a pain of being claimed, of being found. I'll do my best to think about your question. Let me think about it carefully. The air in the sealed room felt as though it had been frozen for centuries. Elena sat on the floor, leaning against the moon shadow crystal, while Alexander crouched in front of her. They were so close that she could see a speck of dust clinging to his eyelashes. Her heart was still pounding violently in her chest, but the rhythm was different now. It wasn't fear, nor anger, but something deeper. It was as if her body already knew the answer, yet her mind was still desperately refusing to accept it. You mean, Elena began, her voice hoarse as if sandpaper were scraping against wood, that from the moment I was born, it was already decided who I would be destined to be with. It wasn't arranged. Alexander's reply was utterly serious, so serious that every word seemed weighed on the tip of his tongue. After my mother received the second half of the prophecy, she went to see your mother. Your mother didn't tell her who the alpha was, but she said one thing to your mother. She said, "If it's him, I won't object." Elena's heart skipped a beat. Her mother had said it. It was, if it was him, her mother wouldn't object. Elena closed her eyes, and an image flashed through her mind of her mother holding her, humming softly in the moonlight. It was a memory she hadn't recalled in 14 years. She thought she'd forgotten it, but she hadn't. Her mother's embrace was warm, smelling of fresh grass and dew, and her fingers ran through her hair so gently, as if afraid of hurting her. "Mom," she cried out silently, her throat tightening painfully. "I don't know if the he your mother spoke of is me." Alexander's voice dropped, tinged with a rare hesitation. "I've never asked. I was afraid that if I did, the answer wouldn't be me. Then I wouldn't know how to go on living." Elena opened her eyes and looked at him. This Alpha King standing so high above everyone else. This man who ruled over 2,000 kilometers of wolf territory now seemed as anxious as a little boy waiting for his test results. A complex wave of emotions surged through her, anger, sadness, but also a hint of tenderness she didn't want to admit. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "Just because your mother thinks the Alpha mentioned in the prophecy might be you, am I supposed to be bound to you for the rest of my life?" Number Alexander's answer was so abrupt it left Elena speechless. "Everything I've told you was to give you the right to choose. You can choose to stay here and complete your awakening. I'll help you find another Alpha to perform the marking. There are several Alphas in the Northern Pack who are powerful enough. While the marking won't be as perfect as that of a soulmate, it will be enough to save your life. You can choose to leave, and I'll use my power to send you to a place in the human world where you can't be found, allowing you to continue your old life. Your seal will likely hold for about 2 more months, after which you'll awaken. At that point, you'll be detected by human surveillance systems, but I'll send people to protect you and buy as much time as possible while I find other solutions for you. You could also choose me. But of these 3 options, only the third requires you to make an active choice. I won't force you." Elena stared at him for a long time. His gaze was so open, it bordered on cruelty. No pretense, no reservations. He laid all his cards on the table for her to choose. She knew how difficult this must be for an Alpha. An Alpha's nature is to control, possess, and take. She could sense the weight behind his self-restraint as he suppressed his instincts and placed the choice entirely in her hands. "I need time," Elena finally said. "As long as you need." Alexander stood up and held out his hand to her. She hesitated for a moment, but then took his hand and used it to pull herself up. His hand was still burning hot, and the moment it touched her, that electric current still shot down her spine. But this time she wasn't startled. She silently committed the sensation to memory. After leaving the secret chamber, life settled into a strange rhythm. During the day, Alexander took her deep into the estate to train, not in combat, but to help her gradually rediscover her wolf's instincts. In the forest, he taught her how to use her sense of smell to track prey, how to distinguish different scents carried by the wind, and how to gauge the ground's moisture and hardness through the soles of her feet. The first time Elena experienced the world through her full werewolf senses, she was so overwhelmed she was speechless. Standing atop a mountain, with her eyes closed, the wind surged in from all directions. She could smell a herd of deer drinking from a stream 3 kilometers away, the exhaust fumes from cars on a highway even farther off, and the earthworms and insects buried deep within the soil. It turned out the world was this rich. It turned out she had spent the previous 14 years living with a nose that had been neutered. In the evenings, Martha would tell her stories of the Moonshadow Wolf clan. Those tales were more thrilling than any novel. The clan's progenitor was a woman who had traversed the battlefield alone during the 1,000-Year War. Her blood could heal cursed wounds, and her voice could calm frenzied werewolves. Every sacred maiden of the Moon, Shadow Wolf clan was chosen by the moon. Their power was not passed down through bloodlines, but through the transmission of will. Before dying, the previous sacred maiden would condense her power into a luminous orb, and with her final breath, bestow it upon her successor. After giving birth to you, your mother sealed her power as the chosen one within you. On a night of the full moon, Martha sat side by side with Elena on the castle terrace. Moonlight bathed them both, spreading a layer of silvery frost across the ground. She knew she would leave sooner or later, so she prepared everything for you in advance, including all the memories, all the power, and all the love she had accumulated throughout her life. Elena gazed at the vast full moon overhead, and for the first time, felt that the moon was no longer something to fear. She could even feel a subtle, warm tingling sensation when the moonlight touched her skin, as if the moon's gravity were tugging, not only at the tides but also at the blood flowing through her veins. "I feel it," she said softly. "I feel it calling to me." Martha turned to look at her. In the moonlight, tears glistened at the corners of the silver-haired woman's eyes. "That's right. You are the daughter of the Moonshadow Wolf clan. The moon has never forgotten you." And so the days passed, one by one. Elena's body grew stronger day by day, her senses sharper day by day, and her wolfish nature awoke more fully with each passing day. She began to crave raw meat, to love running barefoot through the forest, and to feel an inexplicable attachment to Alexander's scent. When he drew near, her heart would race, her breathing would grow shallow, and something deep within her would stir with excitement, as if to say, "He's here, he's here." But at the same time, she began to sense that something was amiss. There was a woman named Lydia, one of the castle's housekeepers, a beta female in her 40s, usually quiet but very efficient in her work. Elena had a good first impression of her, seeing her as a reliable older sister figure, but she gradually noticed that whenever Alexander was with her, Lydia's gaze would fall on them, almost imperceptibly. Not a friendly kind of gaze, but a cold one, as if she were calculating something. There was another thing. Elena had asked Martha who exactly those internal factions were that had betrayed the Moonshadow Wolf clan all those years ago. Martha's expression had grown subtle, and she had brushed the question aside with vague words. "You're not ready to know this yet," but Elena wasn't stupid. She had lived in the human world for 14 years, and the most important thing she had learned was this: if someone doesn't tell you the truth, it's either because telling you would hurt you, or because telling you would be to their disadvantage. And Alexander's aura was changing too. When he was with her during the day, he was always restrained, gentle, and patient. But on several nights, when Elena was pacing the castle, unable to sleep, she passed by Alexander's study and heard muffled growls and the sound of things being thrown inside. She pressed her ear against the door and heard him speaking to someone, his voice low, hoarse, and fierce, carrying the authority of an alpha. "I don't care how powerful the forces behind him are. Find out. I want to know everything before the awakening ceremony." What was he investigating? Elena's intuition told her that things weren't as simple as Alexander made them out to be. Entwined destinies, fulfilled prophecies, alpha mates. These words sounded romantic, but what if someone's hand was manipulating everything behind the scenes? What if that fated arrangement had been orchestrated from the very beginning? She decided to find the answers herself. That night, when the entire castle had fallen asleep, and after waiting in her room until 3 in the morning to make sure there were no more footsteps in the hallway, she slipped quietly out of her room. She didn't go to Alexander's study. She knew it was bound to be under surveillance and protected. She went to Martha's room, but halfway there, she heard a voice. It was Lydia's voice, coming from the direction of the garden, hushed but startlingly clear in the stillness of the night. "She's already entered the estate. We can't let her get near that crystal. The sage said the timeline must strictly follow the prophecy. Any premature awakening will disrupt the entire plan." Elena's footsteps came to an abrupt halt. She pressed herself against the wall, held her breath, and slowed her heartbeat to a crawl. Lydia's words felt like a bucket of ice water dumped over her head. The sage, the timeline, the plan. Behind the prophecy was someone pulling the strings. That girl trusts Alexander completely right now. She hasn't started to suspect anything yet, but her intuition is already kicking in. If we let her continue exploring freely, she'll soon figure it out. Lydia's voice paused for a moment. Then she uttered a sentence that made Elena's blood run cold. "If all else fails, Just take out that old woman right before her awakening ceremony. Martha knows far too much that she shouldn't. Elena's blood ran cold in that instant. Her back was pressed against the wall, and the cold stone pierced her skin through her nightgown. But she didn't feel the chill. Only that one phrase echoed repeatedly in her mind. Get rid of that old woman. Martha knew too much she shouldn't. She pressed herself against the wall, motionless, holding her breath as much as possible, ears pricked, trying to catch more sounds. But the garden had fallen silent. Lydia had clearly ended the call, and footsteps were moving toward the castle. In the darkness, Elena made a quick decision. She couldn't go back to her room. If Lydia came upstairs and caught her in her nightgown in the hallway, it would be all over. She slid silently along the wall into the stairwell next to her, hiding in the shadows as she listened to Lydia's footsteps, pass down the hallway, go up to the 3rd floor, and lock the door. She waited until everything was completely quiet before emerging from the stairwell. Elena didn't go back to her own room. Barefoot, she walked silently down the hallway to Martha's door. She didn't knock, she didn't dare make a sound now. She tried the doorknob, it was locked. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would leap out of her throat, but her hand was steady. She crouched down, ran her fingers over the lock's mechanism, then closed her eyes and used the werewolf senses that had only recently awakened in her to sense. The smell of metal, the position of the gears, the tension of the springs. Her hand gripped the doorknob, and she slowly applied a touch of strength. Click. The lock gave way. The door slid open a crack, silently. Martha hadn't been sleeping. She sat in a chair by the window, draped in a deep red shawl, holding a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Moonlight fell on her silver, gray hair as if dusting it with frost. When she saw Elena appear in the doorway, she showed no surprise, only a soft sigh, as if she'd been waiting for this moment, all along. You heard it, Martha said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Elena stepped into the room, gently closed the door behind her, and locked it. She walked up to Martha, standing in the moonlight, her voice low but every word gritted out. Who is Lydia going to tip off? Who is the sage? What scheme? Why do they want to kill you? Martha looked at her with a gravity in her eyes that Elena had never seen before. She set her teacup on the windowsill, stood up, walked over to the fireplace, and pressed a nearly invisible indentation on the mantelpiece. The wall behind the fireplace slid silently inward, revealing a narrow, dim passageway. Follow me. Elena followed her into the passageway. It was narrow, barely wide enough for one person to pass through, with rough stone walls and steps that wound downward. The air was thick with an ancient, damp scent, as if it had been sealed away for centuries. They walked for about 5 minutes before finally arriving at a hidden basement. The cellar wasn't large, but it was crammed with scrolls, and several yellowed portraits hung on the walls. In the center stood a wooden table, upon which sat an object covered with a black cloth. Martha walked to the table and reached out to lift the black cloth. It was a mirror, but not an ordinary one. The frame was made of black metal, engraved with intricate patterns that seemed alive, slowly shifting in the dim light. The surface was not glass, but a dark liquid, calm and still, like a bottomless pool of water. As Elena looked into the mirror, she felt the blood in her veins grow slightly warm, as if responding to something. This is the Moonshadow mirror. Martha's voice sounded soft in the confined space, so soft it was almost a whisper. A keepsake from your mother. It is also the sacred artifact used by the Moonshadow Wolf clan's chosen ones throughout the ages to glimpse the truth. It does not lie, it does not distort, and it cannot be controlled. It presents only the facts. The moment Elena's fingers touched the frame, the dark liquid on the mirror's surface suddenly began to ripple, as if something were awakening beneath the water. She saw a line of text appear on the surface, golden as if written in light. The bloodline has arrived. The gate of truth shall open. Whom do you wish to know? Ask it, Martha said. Ask it everything you want to know. Elena's throat tightened. She had so many questions, too many to know where to begin. She took a deep breath, then spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Tell me, 14 years ago, who orchestrated the ambush on the Moonshadow Wolf clan?" The text on the mirror vanished. The liquid churned violently for a few seconds before settling once more, revealing new words. "The traitor, whose name is inscribed in the Wolf clan's blood pact. Andrei Volkov." Elena frowned. She didn't recognize the name, but she noticed that the moment Martha saw it, her face went pale. Andrei Volkov. Martha's voice trembled, as if the name itself carried some kind of curse. "He was the former elder of the Northern Pact. After your father, after Alexander's father passed away. He was the most powerful figure in the clan. He's been pushing for cooperation between the Wolf clan and the human government. He believes the Wolf clan can only survive by fully integrating into the human world. But the path he's taken, it's a path of submission. He's willing to hand over the Wolf clan's territory, to have all werewolves registered, to accept human oversight." "Did the existence of the Moonshadow clan hinder his plans?" Elena interjected. Martha nodded. The Moonshadow clan was the only one daring to openly oppose him. The Saintess's power can purify curses, and it can purify the human heart. If the Saintess had performed a thorough purification on the entire clan, all those blinded by ambition would have been cleansed of greed and hatred. Andrei didn't want to lose his power, so he allied with the anti-werewolf factions within the human government, colluded with several werewolf informants, willing to work for him. And in a single night, Martha's voice choked up, he eliminated every adult member of the Moonshadow clan. Elena's fingers tightened around the frame until her knuckles turned white. She stared at the name on the mirror, a rage she had never before experienced churning in her chest. A rage that felt warm, scorching, burning its way up from her stomach to her throat. "Andrei Volkov, where is he now?" "Dead," Martha said. "On the 3rd day after your mother was taken, someone found his body in his study, torn to pieces." Elena froze. "Who did it?" Martha looked at her, a deeply complex emotion in her eyes. "No one knows. There were no scent traces left on his body. All the surveillance systems failed simultaneously that night. Only one person that night. Someone saw a black car pull up outside Andrei's estate. The person inside didn't get out. They just rolled down the window and stuck out a hand. That hand was wearing a black ring. A black ring. The one Alexander wore on his hand. Alexander never admitted it," Martha said slowly. "Nor did he ever deny it. He simply said that he was asleep at home that night. But his mother knew. His bed was cold. His tires were stained with the same red clay found outside Andrew's estate." Elena felt her eyes burn. That man, the man who was always restrained and gentle in her presence, who left every decision entirely up to her, had already killed for her 14 years ago. When he was 15, he tore out a senior elder's throat with his bare hands, because he had promised her mother he would protect her. He had kept that promise for 14 years, from when she was 7 until she was 21, from every day she didn't know he existed to this very moment, as she stood before him. He had never spoken of it. He had never used it as leverage to demand her trust or gratitude. "There's one more thing." Martha's voice snapped Elena back to the present. "The sage Lydia mentioned. It's a new power that emerged after Andrei's death. No one knows the sage's true identity. All we know is that he's been secretly advancing a plan, and at the heart of that plan is you." Elena's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "The second half of the prophecy wasn't discovered. It was altered." Martha's voice suddenly dropped to a whisper, as if she feared even the walls might be listening. "The version of the prophecy your mother gave to Alexander's mother all those years ago is different from the one I later found in our clan's ancient texts. A key word has been replaced." Elena stared at her. "What word?" Martha didn't answer directly. She turned and retrieved an ancient scroll from a hidden compartment in the wall, unfolding it on the table. The parchment was yellowed and frayed at the edges, but the writing remained clear. Her finger touched a line of ancient runes as she read slowly. When the daughter of the Moonshadow unites with the Chosen One, the bloodline shall be severed, and the curse shall be broken. She took out another parchment scroll and unfolded it as well. This is the version currently circulating within the clan. Her finger pointed to the same line of runes, but the rune was different. A single letter had been altered. The meaning of the entire sentence had thus been completely transformed. The Moonshadow Maiden is sacrificed to the Chosen One. The bloodline is severed, and the curse is broken. Sacrifice, not union. Elena finally saw the truth. Simonin had tampered with the prophecy. They changed union to sacrifice, turning a resonance of souls into a one-sided sacrifice. Someone wanted that chosen alpha to devour all her power, while she would be completely drained and die in the process. And this person had been fueling the spread of this prophecy. For years, paving the way for this outcome. The person behind Lydia, Elena's voice was as cold as a winter blade, is the one who altered the prophecy, isn't it? Martha looked at her and nodded slowly. And child, there is one more thing I must tell you. That destined alpha, it's Alexander. Elena finished her sentence. Martha was silent for a long time. Then she made an unexpected move. She reached out and took Elena's hand. Her hands were cold and trembling slightly, as if this woman who had been strong her whole life had finally revealed her vulnerability at the very last moment. Child, if the prophecy hadn't been altered, if everything had gone according to your mother's wishes, you would have been the happiest girl in the world, because Alexander Blackwood has been sincere toward you these past 14 years. I'd stake my son's life on it. But the issue now isn't whether you love him or whether he loves you. The issue now is, Simone intends to use your life as a sacrifice to usher in a new era for the werewolves. And once you complete the marking during the awakening ceremony, that sacrificial mechanism will be activated. Elena stood in that basement. The moonlight couldn't penetrate the thick soil to reach this place, but the thing awakening within her brought a heat more intense than the moonlight. A clear, furious heat, refusing to be manipulated by any fate. So, what I'm going to do is not run away from the mark. Elena lifted her head, her gaze brighter than ever. What I must do is, before the awakening ceremony, find the one who altered the prophecy. Then I will make him know. The last daughter of the Moonshadow clan is not some sacrificial offering. I am the one who will shatter the prophecy. As those words left her lips, the blood within her surged. It was no illusion. It was real. It was as if her mother's spirit, hearing those words within her, had gently squeezed her hand. When Elena emerged from the basement, the sky was already beginning to lighten. She didn't go back to her room to sleep. She sat on the railing of the castle's terrace, barefoot as the morning breeze, carrying the dampness of the forest and the scent of pine, brushed against her cheeks. She watched as the distant horizon gradually brightened, golden rays piercing through the clouds and transforming the entire forest into a flowing oil painting. It was unbelievably beautiful, but she couldn't take it in. Her mind was racing, piecing together every fragment of information in an attempt to construct a complete map. The one who altered the prophecy, the sage, Lydia, Andrei Volkov's death. How could someone who had been laying the groundwork for 14 years let Andrei die so easily, unless Andrei's death itself was part of the plan? A torn apart elder, an enraged alpha youth, a black ring found at the scene. All the evidence pointed to Alexander. Everyone would believe Alexander killed him. But what if Alexander had been misled? What if Andrei was already dead when he arrived, and he had merely left a ring, one he shouldn't have, beside the body? A chill ran down Elena's spine. She leaped over the railing, ran back to the castle, and headed straight for Alexander's study. The castle was quiet in the early morning. The servants hadn't started their work yet, and the corridors were deserted. As she pushed open the study door, Alexander was sitting at his desk, a cup of cold coffee by his side, with papers and maps spread out across the surface. He looked as though he hadn't slept all night. Pale blue shadows lay beneath his eyes, and the collar of his shirt was slightly open. When he saw Elena rush in, his brow twitched, followed by a look of concern. What happened? Andrei Volkov. Elena walked to his desk, braced her hands on the surface, and looked him straight in the eyes. His death. You didn't do it, did you? Alexander's pupils contracted slightly. He set down the pen in his hand, leaned back in his chair, and looked at her with an extremely complex expression. Who told you? No one told me. I figured it out myself. Elena's voice was rapid, as if she feared being interrupted if she paused for even a second. You're 15. Even if you're a genius alpha, there's no way you could have stormed into a senior elder's estate all by yourself, torn him to pieces, and left no scent trail behind. Unless he was already dead when you arrived. Someone deliberately put you there to make you take the fall. Alexander was silent for a long time. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and turned his back to her, his voice soft and heavy. You're right. He was already dead when I arrived. The killer's technique was highly professional. The carotid artery was severed with a single cut, and there were almost no signs of a struggle. The bloodstains at the scene were mixed with the scents of more than one person, and there were at least 3 different perfumes. That was left there on purpose, to throw the investigation off track. I was too young back then. All I could think about was finding proof that your mother didn't do it. I knelt down to examine the wound on his neck. You accidentally left the ring behind. Elena finished his sentence, her voice trembling slightly. Alexander didn't turn around. His silhouette looked unusually stiff in the morning light. I searched for that ring for 7 whole years. By the time I realized it had been deliberately planted there, it was too late. Everyone believed I had killed Andrei, including my own kind. Those who supported Andrei didn't dare oppose me openly, but they've been working against me behind the scenes ever since, and my power base has been severely weakened by this suspicion. I can't fully trust any of the elders, because they can't fully trust me either. That's sage, Elena said. How much have you uncovered about him? Alexander finally turned around. He leaned against the windowsill. The morning light shone from behind him, casting his face into shadow and outlining only a golden silhouette. Very little, so little that it terrifies me every time I think about it. It's been 14 years, and I can only confirm a few things. First, the Sage isn't a single person, it's an organization. Second, their core members are right within the inner circle of the Northern Wolf Pack, right under my nose. Third, their ultimate goal involves you, but I've never been able to pinpoint exactly what it is. I know what their goal is, Elena said. Alexander's gaze suddenly sharpened. The prophecy has been altered. The key word in the second half has been changed from union to sacrifice. Elena's voice was so calm it surprised even her. If I, as a descendant of the Moonshadow Wolves, complete the marking ritual with my destined alpha during the awakening ceremony, that tampered curse mechanism will be activated. I will be sacrificed. The Virgin's power within me will be completely drained and channeled into that alpha. Then, what will that alpha become? A new virgin? No, an alpha cannot bear the Virgin's power. Her mind was racing frantically, like an engine that had been ignited. They don't want to obtain the power of the Holy Maiden. They want to destroy it. The power of the Holy Maiden is the only force capable of purifying the curse of the Wolf Clan's bloodline. If it is wasted within an alpha and completely dissipates, then all werewolves will never be able to be purified. This is the moment the human government has been waiting for, waiting until the internal strife among the Wolf Clan reaches its peak, until we can no longer unite, so they can wipe us all out. And that destined alpha, Alexander's voice was hoarse. He had already guessed the answer himself. If, when the sacrifice mechanism is activated, that alpha is me. This event will destroy me for the rest of my life. I will live on with the memory of killing you. I would suffer for the rest of my life. I would become a monster, consumed by guilt and rage. The northern wolf pack would fall apart after I completely lost control. Elena looked at him. In that moment, she suddenly understood the sage's true scheme. This was not a simple murder plot. It was a multi-layered plan for destruction. If she died, the power of the saintess would dissipate, and the wolf clan would lose all hope of purification. If Alexander collapsed because of her death, the northern wolf pack, the strongest force among the wolf clan, would split. If both happened simultaneously, the entire wolf clan would be completely co-opted or wiped out by the human government within a decade. 3 birds with 1 stone. And the man standing before her had been designated 14 years ago to be the core of this trap. So, we can't let the sacrifice happen, Elena said. She walked around the table to stand in front of Alexander, looking up at him. He was much taller than her, standing in the morning light like a silent mountain. If I must be marked at the awakening ceremony, then we have to find the sages before the ceremony takes place, figure out exactly how the prophecy was altered, and whether it can be reversed. How do we find them? Alexander's voice was low, tinged with the resignation that comes after utter exhaustion. I've spent 14 years with the Northern Wolf Pack and haven't even managed to compile a list of the sage's core members. Elena looked at him and suddenly smiled. It was the first time she had truly smiled since entering this castle. Because you've been investigating in your own way all along. You don't lie, you don't act, and you don't pretend. Alexander paused. What do you mean? What I mean is, Elena turned and walked to the study door, glancing back at him. You've been investigating head on for 14 years and haven't found anything. So why don't I take over? I have something you don't. What? I look like a naive, clueless girl, overprotected, freshly brought back from the human world, and about to be marked by the Alpha King. A smile that chilled him to the bone curved Elena's lips. Who would be on guard against a naive, clueless girl? Alexander stood in the morning light, watching her back disappear at the end of the corridor. For the first time, he realized that this girl he had secretly protected for 14 years had never been a flower in need of protection. She was the daughter of the Moonshadow Wolf clan. Her mother was a woman who, in the face of despair, would trade her own life for her daughter's survival. The blood of a game breaker flowed through her veins. And game breakers were never meant to be saved. They were here to overturn the chessboard. Elena's plan began with breakfast. The next morning, seated at the table, she wore a light-colored floral dress that Martha had prepared for her, her hair loosely tied back in a ponytail. She looked just like any young girl who had recently arrived in the big city and was curious about everything. She cut into the fried eggs on her plate, her movements a bit clumsy. She hadn't quite mastered werewolf table manners yet. Lydia, sitting across from her, held a coffee cup and cast a subtle, almost imperceptible glance her way. The look was so subtle that if Elena hadn't known Lydia's true identity beforehand, she might never have noticed anything amiss in the way the housekeeper was observing her. But she noticed it now, and she silently took note of it. Lydia, Elena looked up, offering a slightly shy smile. May I ask you a question? Lydia set down her coffee cup, her face adorned with a standard professional smile. Of course, Miss Elena. I heard from Aunt Martha that you've been with the Northern Wolf Pack for nearly 20 years. Is that true? Elena's tone carried just the right amount of curiosity and admiration, like a little girl listening to a legendary tale. Then you must have seen a lot, right? I was thinking about it last night. I don't understand anything, and the awakening ceremony is coming up soon. I'm so nervous. I don't know what to do to be proper. Lydia's smile didn't waver in the slightest, but Elena noticed her pupils contract imperceptibly for a split second, an instinctive reaction when assessing whether someone posed a threat. "Miss Elena, there's no need to worry. The clan leader will take care of everything. You just need to relax and let things unfold naturally." But Elena lowered her head, twisting the hem of her skirt nervously, her voice growing quieter. "I heard there's a lot to do at the awakening ceremony, and that I have to do that. That marking with the alpha, I don't know what to do." She raised her eyes, a glimmer of tears welling up in her eyes. Her acting was so good she almost applauded herself in her mind. Lydia watched her expression, and something deep in her eyes relaxed, just a little a sign that her guard was down. A truly threatening person wouldn't display such vulnerability in front of her. Only a naive girl who really knew nothing would. "You don't need to prepare for anything." Lydia's voice softened, like that of a caring older sister. "The Alpha will guide you through everything. You just need to trust him." Elena nodded obediently and lowered her head to continue eating. The moment she lowered her head, her gaze shifted to a completely different dimension. Icy, cold, and as sharp as a knife's edge. Her earlier performance hadn't been merely to lower Lydia's guard. She'd also been observing something else. When Lydia mentioned the word mark, the flares of her nostrils had expanded ever so slightly. That was an instinctive reaction wolves exhibit when they catch a certain scent. What scent? Nervousness, excitement, or some pheromone she hadn't yet learned to distinguish. Elena etched this detail into her memory. Over the next 3 days, Elena embarked on a stealthy hunt. Every morning she would appear in the kitchen, adopting an "I'd like to help" attitude as she prepared breakfast with Lydia. She would clumsily knock over the salt shaker, carefully cut her finger, and laugh as she complained that "I've been in the human world too long. I can't do anything right." Lydia's initial polite indifference gradually gave way to lowered guard, and she even occasionally laughed out loud when Elena made a mistake. Lydia thought she was teaching a clueless little girl how to adapt to life among the wolves. What she didn't know was that this little girl was using the observational skills honed over 14 years in the human world to dissect her, piece by piece, as if taking apart a precision instrument. On the third night, Elena pieced together all the information she'd gathered in her room. She scratched symbols into the sheets with her fingernails, symbols only she could decipher. Lydia would disappear for 40 minutes every evening between 5:30 and 6 o'clock, claiming she was taking inventory in the storeroom. Before each disappearance, she'd change into boots with dark red mud caked to the soles. When she returned from those 40 minutes, her scent carried an extremely faint hint of some ancient sandalwood, not ordinary sandalwood. This scent was mixed with something that instinctively repelled Elena, like the smell of blood and dust evaporating under high heat. On the evening of the 4th day, taking advantage of Lydia's absence, Elena slipped into her room. Lydia's room was at the far end of the 3rd floor in the castle's east wing. The door was secured by a simple mechanical lock, which required almost no effort for Elena to open. She slipped sideways into the room and silently closed the door behind her. The room was small and arranged with extreme precision. Not a single wrinkle on the bed, items on the desk arranged in perfect right angles, and clothes in the wardrobe sorted by shade. This was the domain of someone with an intense need for control and extreme self-discipline. Elena quickly scanned the room, her gaze finally settling on a nearly imperceptible crack at the base of the nightstand. She crouched down and gently probed the crack with her finger. Her fingertip brushed against the texture of paper. She pulled it out carefully. It was a folded note, made of thin, pale yellow paper with slightly frayed edges, clearly having been folded and refolded many times. She unfolded the note. It contained only a single line, written in a dark red ink she had never seen before. "Before the full moon, deliver the shard of the moon, shadow crystal, to the 3rd oak tree in Ironwood Forest. If you fail, you know the consequences." No signature, no date, but that handwriting. Elena stared at it for a long time, feeling an unsettling sense of familiarity. She must have seen that handwriting somewhere before. She folded the note back exactly as it had been, slipped it back into the crevice, restored everything to its original state, and left the room. Her fingertips were still cold when she returned to her own room. Fragments of the Moonshadow crystal, that black crystal in the secret chamber, which held the collective memories of the Moonshadow Wolf clan. It actually had fragments. Who had taken a piece of it? What did they intend to do with those fragments? She didn't tell Alexander about this. It wasn't that she didn't trust him, but she had a gut feeling that if he found out, he would use an alpha's thunderous methods to storm in and grab Lydia for interrogation. That would tip off the snake. She had barely managed to catch a glimpse of the snake's tail. She couldn't let it retreat. She needed an ally. Someone not on Lydia's list of suspects, not under the sage's surveillance, and smart enough to handle this. Elena found Marcus after dinner, the bespectacled, mild-mannered beta leader, the strategist of the Northern Wolf Pack. She'd noticed that Marcus had been deliberately keeping his distance from her these past few days. Unlike Martha's warmth or Alexander's attentiveness, he rarely even met her gaze at the dinner table. But it wasn't hostility. It was a cautious reluctance to be seen taking sides in the complex power dynamics. She found him in the library. Marcus was seated at a table in the corner, a thick ancient tome spread out before him, a pen in his hand as he wrote something in a notebook. He looked up at the sound of footsteps. When he saw it was Elena, his eyes flickered behind his glasses, and then he closed the notebook. "Miss Elena." He stood up and gave a slight bow. His manners were impeccable, not a single flaw. "Mr. Marcus." Elena walked over and sat down across from him, getting straight to the point without waiting for an invitation. "I'd like to ask you a question. How many people in the Northern Wolf Pack can be fully trusted?" Marcus pushed his glasses up and remained silent for a few seconds. Then he sat back down, and the look in his eyes toward Elena changed. No longer that polite, distant scrutiny, but something more serious. "Why do you ask?" "Because someone wants to kill me on the night of the full moon," Elena stated matter-of-factly. She didn't exaggerate or play on emotions. She simply stated the facts. "And I suspect that person is right here in this castle." Marcus's expression didn't change much, but Elena noticed he'd put the cap back on his pen. When someone engaged in scholarly work didn't intend to continue the conversation, they'd keep the cap off if he put it on. It meant he was ready to listen seriously. "Do you have any evidence?" "Not yet," Elena answered honestly. "But I have something my mother left me. The Moonshadow mirror. It told me something." Marcus's pupils contracted sharply at the words. Moonshadow mirror. "Your mother is the Moonshadow mirror. In your possession. Martha is keeping it for me." Elena stared into his eyes, not missing a single micro-expression on his face. "I know your position within the Northern Wolf Pack is delicate. You're not Alexander's confidant, nor are you part of the Council of Elders. You're a beta. In this rigidly hierarchical wolf society, your voice isn't usually heard. But I need someone's eyes and ears, someone who can go where the alphas can't, who can hear what the alphas can't." Marcus was silent for a long time, long enough that Elena almost thought she'd made a mistake. Then he took off his glasses and wiped the lenses with the hem of his shirt. That gesture transformed him from a scholar into something else. "You guessed right." Marcus put his glasses back on, his voice lowered to a barely audible whisper. "I do know certain things, but I can't tell you, because the more you know, the more dangerous you become." "I'm already dangerous," Elena said. "I'm the daughter of the Moonshadow Pack. From the day I was born, I was destined to never be safe." Marcus looked at her and finally let out a soft sigh. He pulled a key from his pocket, placed it on the desk, and pushed it toward Elena. "There's a locked iron door on the second basement level of the castle's east wing. This key will open it. As for what's inside, I can't tell you what it is. You'll have to see for yourself." He stood up, gathered his ancient texts and notebook, and headed toward the library door. He paused at the doorway without looking back. After you've seen it, if you want to talk to me. I'm here every night at this time. Come back when you've had time to think it through. He left. Elena sat in the empty library, moonlight streaming through the high windows and falling on the bronze key. The key's teeth were badly worn, clearly having been used many times. She picked up the key, the metal pressed against the skin of her palm, carrying a warmth that came from having been held by countless hands. She didn't know what she would find behind that door, but the moment her fingertips touched the key, a faint golden glow flashed. It was faint and fleeting. It was as if something inside her was telling her, this is the right direction. 2 floors below ground. As Elena stood before the iron door, the candlelight in the passageway flickered behind her, casting a long, distorted shadow. The door looked ancient, its surface covered in rust and grime, as if no one had opened it in decades. But the lock was new silver, finely crafted, and perfectly matched the teeth of the key in her hand. She inserted the key into the lock. A crisp click echoed through the underground passageway. The iron door didn't creak with that familiar old-world squeak. Instead, it slid open silently, as if its hinges had been meticulously maintained. A cold draft surged through the crack, carrying a scent that mingled paper, dust, herbs, and the smell of blood. Elena's heart sank. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and then she stepped over the threshold. The room beyond the door was surprisingly large. It was about half the size of the castle's banquet hall, with high ceilings and several magical lamps embedded in the walls, casting a soft white light. The room was filled with bookshelves, not the decorative kind, but the sort crammed to the brim, with spines faded from decades of use. In the center of the room stood a large wooden table, upon which sat several oil lamps, a scroll of parchment, and something she recognized at a glance. A shard of moonlight crystal, a piece about the size of a fist, set on an iron base, its surface covered in fine cracks. As Elena approached it, she could feel the energy within the shard faint, but definitely there, like a dying heart still beating its final beats. She reached out to touch it, but her fingertips stopped a few centimeters away. She couldn't touch it. She wasn't sure what would happen if she did, nor did she know exactly what Marcus had asked her to come see. Her gaze shifted from the shard to the parchment on the table. It was a letter. The letter had no salutation and no signature, only line after line of text. The handwriting was so neat, it was almost block letters. But as soon as Elena made out the first line, she recognized the script. It was identical to the note she'd seen in Lydia's room, only written here with greater composure. The shard of the moonlight crystal has been successfully embedded into the core node of the sacrificial array. The sage's plan is proceeding smoothly. However, the Moonshadow Maiden is proving more difficult to control than anticipated. Her intuition is too keen. If she is allowed to continue moving freely, she is highly likely to discover the truth before the ritual. It is recommended that contingency plan B be activated 3 days prior to the awakening ritual, isolate Martha, and cut off her access to information regarding the Moonshadow Maiden. Elena's blood felt as though it had frozen. She continued reading. The Alpha King's trust level has been tested. His feelings for the Moonshadow Maiden exceed expectations. This can be exploited. If the Moonshadow Maiden is threatened on the eve of the ritual, the Alpha will mark her prematurely, regardless of the consequences. At that moment, the sacrificial array will automatically activate as soon as the marking is complete. There will be no possibility of reversal. At the end of the letter was a symbol, the head of a wolf, but the wolf's eyes were not normal round pupils. Instead, they were 2 vertical lines, as if something had pierced through them. Elena stared at the symbol for a long time, etching it firmly into her mind. She returned the letter to its place and turned to scan the bookshelves. Most of the bookshelves held ancient texts and research notes covering topics such as the bloodline curse of the Wolf Clan, the history of the Moonshadow Wolf Clan, and blueprints for various sacrificial formations. Her fingers glided along the spines of the books until they suddenly paused, a black-covered notebook with no title, wedged between two thick books on formations. She pulled out the notebook and opened the first page. The first page contained only one sentence. To whoever reads this record, if you can see these words, it means you have reached a point of no return. Do not look back, move forward. She had never seen that handwriting before. It wasn't printed text, nor was it Marcus's or Lydia's handwriting. The script possessed a strange vitality, and the ink on the page shimmered with a faint silver glow. It was the Moonshadow Wolf Clan's ink. Elena's fingers trembled slightly. She turned to the second page. I am the 27th High Priestess of the Moonshadow Wolf Clan. My daughter will awaken in 14 years to become the Breaker. If the matter of the prophecy's tampering is not resolved during my lifetime, this record will serve as a backup to tell my daughter or anyone who finds it where the true door lies. Below were coordinates. Elena stared at the coordinates for a long time, recognizing the area as a region roughly 40 kilometers northwest of the castle. In her memory, it was a forest marked as a restricted zone. She closed the notebook and slipped it into the inner pocket of her coat. Then she restored everything to its original state. The letter returned to its place, the chair adjusted to its proper angle, and the oil lamp positioned exactly as it had been when she entered. She shut the iron door, locked it, and pulled out the key. Standing in that dim corridor, her mind felt as though it were overflowing with information, every cell racing at high speed. Marcus, which side was he on? Really, he'd left this notebook here, and used that key to lure her down, yet he'd been in the library pretending to be a neutral bystander. Was he trying to help her, or was he using her to find the real door? She couldn't be sure, but one thing she knew for certain, she had to go to those coordinates. She had to find that door before anyone else did. It was late at night by the time Elena returned to her room. She closed the door, leaned her back against it, pulled the notebook from the inner pocket of her coat, and opened it again. She lightly traced her fingertips over the silver glowing script. The silver light grew brighter at her touch, as if the ink had been awakened by her body heat. She didn't know why she hadn't told Alexander right away. Perhaps because she needed a little more proof, or maybe because she harbored a vague fear that if Alexander knew about the notebook, he would take on all the danger himself, leaving her to wait safely inside the castle. But she didn't need safety, she needed answers. And those answers lay within the restricted zone, 40 kilometers away. She changed into dark clothes and swapped her shoes for soft-soled boots, suitable for running through the forest. She wrapped the notebook in a waterproof cloth and tied it close to her skin at her waist. Then she left a note on the windowsill with just 4 words, "Back in 3 days." She pushed open the window, and the early autumn night breeze rushed in, carrying the scent of the forest. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and felt her heartbeat merge with the pulse of the night. Then she opened her eyes, and a golden glow flashed deep within her pupils. She leaped into the night outside the castle and vanished. Moonlight shone on her running silhouette, like a silver river, laying out a path for her. The moment she touched down on the castle's outer wall, Elena felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced before. It wasn't the relief of escaping a cage. It was more like a feeling of liberation. It was as if a string inside her, taut for 14 years, had finally been loosened. She ran under the moonlight, moving at a speed far beyond human limits. The wind whistled past her ears. The shadows of the trees rushed by on either side, and her feet leaped lightly from one rock to another with almost no effort. She hadn't fully transformed into a wolf, but she could feel her skeleton subtly readjusting, her joints more supple, her muscles more explosive, her vision in the darkness as clear as if it were daytime. Her sense of smell captured every detail in the air, earthworms in the soil, moss on tree bark, fish swimming in a distant stream. The world unfolded before her like a complete panorama she had never seen before. She ran for about half an hour, without slowing down in the slightest. Whenever she began to feel tired, all she had to do was take a deep breath, and the moonlight would pour into her body like a warm liquid through her nostrils and lungs, washing away her fatigue. She grew increasingly convinced that her mother's words were true. The daughters of the Moonshadow Wolf clan are children chosen by the moon. The coordinates led to an ancient forest she had never set foot in before. The terrain here was completely different from that around the castle. The trees were taller and older, their canopies so dense they almost blocked out all the moonlight, with only scattered patches of silvery light filtering through the gaps in the branches to fall upon the ground. The ground was covered with a thick layer of fallen leaves. Stepping on them felt soft and cushiony, making no sound. The air was thick with a pungent, musty scent, as if it hadn't been stirred by the wind for centuries. Elena stopped in front of a massive oak tree. She pulled out her notebook and checked the coordinates again. This was the spot. But as she looked around, there was nothing but the oak and a dense thicket of shrubs. No gate, no buildings. She frowned, tucked the notebook away, and walked around the oak. The trunk was incredibly thick. It would take at least 5 adults to encircle it. The bark was covered in thick moss and ferns, looking as though no one had touched it in centuries. But her intuition told her something was off. She ran her fingertips over the moss on the trunk. The moss didn't feel quite right. It was too uniform. Naturally growing moss should be uneven in thickness, with jagged edges. But the moss here had a subtle smoothness to it when touched, as if it were a disguise layered over a hard surface. Elena took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and focused all her attention on her fingertips. Her fingernails slowly lengthened into claws, and she gently scraped the surface of the moss with them. Scratch. It wasn't the sound of scraping moss. It was the sound of metal grinding against metal. Whatever lay beneath the moss was made of metal. She began using both hands to rapidly peel away the moss and vines covering the tree trunk. Large chunks of the disguise were torn away, revealing what lay beneath. It wasn't an oak tree at all, but a massive circular metal door, nearly 3 meters in diameter. The door's surface was carved with intricate patterns. A full moon hung at the center, surrounded by 13 silhouettes of wolves, each in a different pose, some running, some howling at the sky, some bowing their heads to drink, and some tearing at one another. A circle of ancient runes was engraved along the edge of the door, exactly the same as the ones Elena had seen on the Moonshadow mirror in the secret chamber. Her heart began to race. She pressed her hand against the cold metal surface of the door, and then she felt it. Something on the other side of the door responding to her touch, a faint vibration like a heartbeat. Elena looked down and discovered a depression in the very center of the door, the shape of a palm. Almost instinctively, she pressed her right hand against it. The moment her palm touched it, the metal grew scorching hot. A force so powerful it made her knees go weak surged out from within the door, flooding directly into her arm, racing along her bones and veins all the way to her heart. Her pupils suddenly turned pure gold, and in that split second, the entire world became a stream of light. She saw it. The door's internal structure unfolded in her mind like a 3-dimensional diagram. Every gear, every seal, every energy channel. Finally, a muffled rumble, as if coming from the depths of the earth, echoed from the door's interior. The circular metal door began to rotate, and the silhouettes of the wolves rearranged themselves as it spun, as if they were alive. When the last wolf silhouette aligned with the moon symbol, a crack split open in the center of the door, not opening from the middle, but the entire door sinking into the ground, revealing a flight of stone steps leading downward. A breeze blew from the depths of the stone steps, an ancient breeze. It carried the scent of dust and dry herbs, along with a faint whiff of blood from further down that instinctively put her on guard. Elena stood at the entrance, moonlight streaming in behind her and casting a narrow cone of light onto the stone steps. Beyond that cone lay endless darkness. She pulled out a small object Alexander had given her a few days earlier, a wolf's tooth pendant set with a glowing gemstone. She hung the pendant around her neck. Its faint light illuminated the area. A few steps ahead, she glanced back at the forest behind her. The moonlight was bright, the forest was quiet, and no one was chasing her. She was now completely alone. Then she turned back and stepped onto the first stone step. The staircase was long. She counted the steps as she descended, 123. With every step down, the air grew colder and heavier, and the change in air pressure caused a slight stinging sensation deep in her ears. When she reached the 123rd step, the staircase ended, and she found herself standing in a wide corridor. Every few paces along the walls on either side of the corridor, an oil lamp, long since extinguished, was embedded in the wall, its bowl filled with dried grease and ash. At the end of the corridor was a wooden door, much smaller than the metal door above, about the size of a typical house door. But when Elena saw it, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, not out of fear, but because of familiarity. She felt a strange sense of familiarity with that door. She had never seen it before, yet she recognized the fine wood grain on the door panel, the exact location of the rust on the doorknob, and the tiny crack in the lower left corner of the doorframe. It was as if something she had seen countless times in her dreams had suddenly materialized in reality. She gently pushed the door with her fingertips. It wasn't locked. With a creak, it swung open inward. Beyond the door lay a small stone chamber, circular, about 10 paces in diameter, with a high vaulted ceiling. The walls were inlaid with countless tiny luminescent minerals, flickering faintly like a starry sky and illuminating the entire space. In the very center of the chamber stood a crystal almost identical to the moon, shadow crystal she had seen in the castle's secret chamber. But this one was whole, without a single crack or flaw, as pure as a drop of solidified moonlight. And directly beneath that crystal, a figure knelt, a gaunt, elderly woman with hair that was almost entirely white. She wore a tattered gray robe, her hands bound behind her back with a silver chain. Her head was bowed, as if she had been unconscious for a long time. But the moment Elena stepped into the stone chamber, the old woman suddenly raised her head. Her eyes were completely blind, sunken sockets, nothing but 2 black holes. But her nose twitched in the air, her cracked lips trembled, and she uttered a voice, so hoarse it was barely audible, laced with a sob. "It's you. You finally come." Elena froze in her tracks. That voice, that hoarse, almost broken voice. She recognized it. Even after 14 years, even though the voice had grown so old it was completely unrecognizable, she still recognized it. It was her mother's voice. Elena's legs felt as if all the bones had been pulled out of them, and she collapsed to her knees on the cold ground. She opened her mouth, wanting to call out "Mom," but her throat felt blocked by something, and she couldn't make a sound. Tears welled up uncontrollably from her eyes, falling in large drops onto the ground, looking like shattered pearls in the faint glow of the luminous ore. 14 years. She had thought she would never see her mother again in this lifetime. She had thought her mother was dead. She had thought the holy maiden of the moon, Shadow Wolf clan, had been wiped out on that night, 14 years ago. But she was wrong. Her mother wasn't dead. Her mother was locked up here, in this underground dungeon she had never known. Alone, chained, blind, she had waited 14 years, waiting for her daughter to find her. "Don't cry." The old woman's voice was still hoarse, but steadier than before, even carrying a hint of a smile. "I taught you, the daughters of Moonshadow, do not cry. Tears are for the living to celebrate, not to mourn." Elena had to summon all her strength to squeeze 2 words from her throat. "Mother." Then, She completely broke down. She crawled across the floor on her knees, using fingers that trembled almost beyond her control to touch her mother's wrists, raw and bloodied from the chains. She felt them, the scars, the old scabs, the skin shriveled to a mere layer of skin from years of malnutrition. Every inch she touched was 14 years of suffering, 14 years of waiting, 14 years of loneliness and pain. She pressed her forehead against her mother's icy fingertips, crying until her whole body shook, crying until she could make no sound. The old woman did not struggle, did not urge her on. She simply used that shackled hand, the last tiny segment of her fingers that could move, to gently brush against Elena's forehead. That gesture was just as gentle as that last silent mouth, forming in front of the closet 14 years ago. Then she spoke, her voice low but clear, as if uttering a sentence she had been preparing for 14 years. Child, listen carefully. I don't have much time left. I've been using my last reserves of the Virgin's power to hold on to life, just to wait for you to come. You know about the prophecy being tampered with, don't you? Elena nodded vigorously, her vision blurred by tears. Good. Her mother's voice carried a calm sense of relief. Then I won't have to explain everything from the beginning. Child, the world outside is no longer safe. The sage's influence is far greater than you imagine. They're not just within the Wolf clan. They have spies in the highest echelons of the human government. You thought I was dead 14 years ago because they wanted me to die. Only then could they control the interpretation of that prophecy. But why were you locked up here? Elena's voice broke into fragments. Who locked you up? Her mother was silent for a moment. Then she spoke 2 words. Those 2 words struck like a bolt of lightning, shattering Elena's entire world. Marcus. Elena's sobs stopped abruptly in that instant. She knelt on the cold floor, her forehead pressed against her mother's withered fingers, her entire body like a stone statue, struck by lightning. All sound caught in her throat, all blood rushing to her head, all thought shattering into dust before those 2 words. Marcus, that bespectacled, well-mannered beta leader who spoke in a soft, gentle voice. The man who had pushed the key across the library table. The man who had told her, if you want to talk after you're done reading, I'm here every night. Marcus, he was the one who had locked her mother in here. Number Elena's fingertips began to tremble violently. No, if he locked her in, why would he give me the key? Why did he let me find this place? Is he using me to verify something? Or does he already know my mother doesn't have long to live, so he doesn't care anymore? The notebook, the letter, the dark red ink on that note flashed through her mind. All the fragments spun wildly, trying to piece together a complete picture. But she couldn't piece it together, because the most crucial piece of information was missing. Marcus's true stance. Mom. Elena looked up, tears and dust mingling on her face, her voice hoarse as sandpaper. Why would Marcus do this? Isn't he on my side? He's the one who gave me the key and told me there was something here. Though her mother's eyes were blind, a deeply complex curve formed at the corners of her mouth, an expression that blended a bitter smile with a sense of relief. He is on your side, child, but being on your side and locking me up here aren't mutually exclusive. She fell silent for a few seconds, as if sorting out where to begin a story that had grown too long. 14 years ago, on the night of the purge, it was Marcus who rescued me from the chaos. He tampered with the human government's escort convoy, staging an accident so everyone would think I was dead. Then he hid me here, in this underground sanctuary, the true ruins of the Moonshadow Wolf clan. But Elena's mind grew even more confused. Why didn't he tell Alexander? Why didn't he tell Martha? Why did he keep you locked up here for 14 years? Hiding you from everyone, because I begged him to. Her mother's voice was as calm as a deep pool. I asked him to lock me away, to hide me, and not to tell anyone. Not Alexander, not Martha, not even you. Elena froze. Why? Because the sage's infiltration within the Wolf clan runs deeper than I ever imagined. Before the purge began, I tried to trace the origin of the prophecy and found a clue that pointed to someone within the highest ranks of the Northern Wolf Pack at the time. But before I could confirm who that person was, the purge began. I was gravely wounded at the time. If I hadn't died, that person would have tracked me down and found you still in swaddling clothes. So I had to die, at least in everyone's eyes, I had to die. Mother's voice paused here, growing softer. Marcus agreed to help me play this part. For 14 years he has taken enormous risks you cannot even imagine. Every time he came to see me, he had to take a different route, make sure no one was following him, and even change his scent to disguise himself. Because for the past 14 years, the wise ones have never stopped searching for me. Elena's tears fell silently. She suddenly understood so much, why Marcus had always been so distant in the castle, why he never got too close to Alexander, why he always wore those glasses as if trying to hide behind the lenses. He wasn't neutral, he wasn't indifferent. He was guarding a secret he couldn't tell anyone, in his own way. For 14 years, he had shouldered this secret alone, living cautiously amidst the power struggles of the Wolf clan. But in the end, he chose to lay his cards on the table before her. He let her decide for herself whether to walk through that door, whether to know the truth. Mom. Elena's voice finally regained some strength. She wiped away her tears, clasped her mother's hand, and her gaze had changed. It was the gaze of one who breaks the deadlock, a gaze that no longer asks, "Why me?" but begins to ask, "What do we do next? Tell me, is there any way to reverse the altered prophecy? Where is the core node of that sacrificial array? How do I destroy it?" Her mother fell silent. It wasn't the silence of one who didn't know the answer, but a heavier silence, one tinged with resolve. She slowly raised her head. Even though those eyes could no longer see anything, she still turned her face precisely toward Elena, like an aged wolf using its last remaining sense of smell to locate her cub. There are 2 core nodes in the sacrificial array. One is a fragment of the Moonshadow crystal. The object in that secret chamber beneath the castle is merely a faconi. The true core fragment has been embedded within the base of the prophecy array. The base is located beneath the ancestral altar of the Northern Wolf Pack. That is the first node. She paused. The second node. She stopped. Her body suddenly shook violently, as if an electric current were coursing through her. Elena watched in horror as a faint silver glow began to seep through her mother's clothing over her chest, growing brighter and more blinding by the second. The silver light seemed to be oozing from her skin, as if something were struggling to break free from within her. Mom. Elena lunged forward, trying to press down on the light, but her hand passed right through it, grasping nothing. The silver light seemed insubstantial, like a burning flame, withdrawing inch by inch from her mother's body. The time has come. Her mother's voice had grown calm, even carrying a hint of a relieved smile. I've been using my last shred of Virgin's power to hold on to life, waiting for you. Now that you're here and I've passed the message to you, my mission is complete. No. Elena's voice shattered into a wail. She frantically pressed her hands against the light seeping from her mother's chest, but the rays slipped through her fingers, as if she were grasping at something she could never hold. Don't go, Mom. I just found you. I've only just seen you. I have so much to tell you. I haven't even listened to me. Her mother's voice suddenly became crystal clear, so sharp it cut through all the static. Her 2 blind eyes stared straight at Elena, and the last 2 tears fell from her sunken eye sockets. The second node is the bloodline connection between you and me. Elena froze. The silver light within her mother's body was fading rapidly, forming countless fine cracks on the surface of her skin, like the patterns that appear on porcelain just before it shatters. The Sage's Sacrifice Array was designed using the bloodline inheritance mechanism of the Moonshadow Wolf clan. When you complete the marking with your destined alpha, the array will activate the power of the Holy Maiden within you, and that power will travel along the bloodline connection, tracing back to its source. The source is you. Elena's voice trembled as she finished her mother's sentence. If you're still alive, the returning force will burn your soul to ashes. If you're already dead, that power will have nowhere to go, so it will explode inside me, destroying me along with it." Her mother smiled and nodded. "So, as long as I'm alive, all you have to do is complete the marking, and I'll die. After I'm dead, if you complete the mark, you yourself will die. This is the perfect double cross they've designed. Whether I'm alive or dead, as long as you complete that tampered ritual, I can't win." Elena's voice crumbled to dust. She looked at her mother's chest. Most of the silver light had already faded, and her mother's face was beginning to turn transparent, like moonlight melting away. 14 years. Mom had spent 14 years of imprisonment and agony, locking away her last shred of vitality, just to convey this message, to tell her that this game had never left her any way out from the very beginning. But Mom hadn't finished speaking. "I've locked away my life for these 14 years, not just to tell you this. I did it to give you one last thing." Her mother raised her hand, bound by chains, and her trembling finger pointed to a loose stone in the corner of the stone chamber. "There is something I left for you there, something I took from beneath the ancestral altar before I was captured. I traded my life for it. It is the key to everything." Elena followed her finger's gaze. The stone blended almost seamlessly into the ground. She reached out and moved the stone aside. Beneath it was a hidden compartment the size of a palm. Inside lay an object wrapped in gray cloth. She gently unwrapped the cloth, revealing a silver medallion. The pattern engraved on it was identical to the one on the metal door. A full moon surrounded by 13 wolves. "What is this?" Elena's voice trembled. Her mother's lips had begun to turn white, and her voice grew fainter and fainter, like the last wisp of smoke in the wind. "That is the core of the Moonshadow Wolf clan's battle standard. Place it in the sacred fire at the ancestral altar. The sacred fire will consume all power that does not belong to the Moonshadow, including that tampered prophecy array." With every word she spoke, her voice grew fainter, and her form grew more translucent. Elena knelt before her, clutching the silver emblem tightly in her palm. The silver light pierced her palm, and bright red blood dripped through her fingers. But she felt no pain. She simply watched as her mother, like a drop of ink falling into water, faded away before her, bit by bit. "Elena," her mother's final word before she vanished completely. She didn't call her child. She called her by name. Elena, the name she'd chosen for herself on the orphanage registration form. No one knew the true meaning of that name except her. It was the last remnant of the Moonshadow Wolf clan's mark. She'd secretly kept Elena, which in the ancient language of the Wolf clan meant, "Where the moonlight falls, you are where the moonlight reaches. No matter where you go, the moon will shine upon you. And so will I." That final streak of silver light drifted from her mother's fingertips, like an invisible hand gently caressing Elena's face. Then the light faded completely. The underground chamber fell silent, leaving only the sound of her own heavy breathing and the faint heartbeat, like vibration emanating from the badge she clutched in her hand. The voice the Moonshadow Wolf clan's last high priestess had left behind for this world.